Sustainable Tairafiti meeting today. Meredith, may I ask that you open our hui for us?
Atamarie koutou, if it's all right with you, I'm going to stand and pray, but you can stand for me too. He te atua ngā mihi kia koutou. We thank you for this day. We thank you for the beautiful sunshine that we get to enjoy. We ask that you give us wisdom and guidance as we deliberate and discuss sustainable tairafiti. We thank you for the tile that sustains us, and we ask that you just be with us today. We ask this in your mighty name. Amen.
Thank you for that. So, apologies. I have got Councillor Wharehinga, but he is a leave of absence because he is doing his training for his, I want to say citizenship. What's the word I'm after? Commissioner training today, yes. And Councillor Faulkner will be joining us via Zoom. Any other apologies? No. Declarations of interest. Councillor Faulkner has a declaration of interest just for the public deputation, as she is the past president of Fed Farmers. That is noted. Thank you, Councillor Faulkner. And Councillor Worsnop as well, past president of Fed Farmers. That's noted. Vice President, all good. Let's go to our minutes, councillors. Page 5. Any comments or corrections or queries around our minutes? Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Seymour. Do I have a Councillor Foster? All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thanks for that. Let's move on to our action sheet, which is on page 10. So as you can see, that is in progress. Stuff are happening. We have our own workshop lined up. So this action item is moving forward. We also had a housing presentation at Manaki Tairafiti tomorrow, which will also be raised at that workshop of ours. Any questions around that action point? Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Are we going to be doing that workshop in isolation, or do we expect to have discussion with other parties at that workshop? Is it more setting our appetite to be involved?
Ms. Kohere.
Through the chair, it's with councillors only.
Thank you. On page 11, we have our governance work plan. Thank you for that. No questions around that.
My question was around the draft development contributions policy. Are we engaging with our developers, the Chamber of Commerce, etc., on that draft?
So we'll have a council workshop on the development contributions itself and some of the issues. Following that, when there's a bit more clarity around where council might want to go, we'll then engage with the developers, and then they will have an opportunity to input through the consultation process.
Okay, leave of absence is Councillor Wharehinga. Thank you. I'll second. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Acknowledgements and tributes? None. So, councillors, I welcome Hilary Walker from Fed Farmers and also Toby Williams, one of our farmers in the region. They will join us via Zoom this morning. And Hilary, morning, Hilary. You're still muted, so you'll just have to unmute yourself, but welcome to the Gisborne District Council. Thank you for the public deputation. I just want to clarify the process. When we do have a public deputation, you can talk to us, and in this forum, we only have the ability to ask questions of you to clarify what you have said. So I just want to make sure you've got about 5 to 10 minutes to talk to us, and then we can ask questions to clarify if we have some. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Toby, can you...
You will have to turn up your volume, Hilary.
Yeah. Can you hear that okay?
Can you just speak up a bit more so we can test the volume?
Yeah. How's that sounding? Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. It's
okay,
all good,
thank you.
And we can see your screen. Thank you,
Okay,
Hilary.
good. All right, Toby, did you want to say anything first, or shall I crack on?
Oh, you crack on, Hilary. I think we've got limited time, so.
Okay, sure. So we'll, we understand that you will have read recent correspondence from us, or correspondence of 10 July, so I won't go through that detail. That's probably included more robust information in it. So we're here today. The decision isn't made lightly to be here today. We appreciate we are asking you to revisit information or revisit a decision that that was provided to you on information in a staff report. To date, though, we haven't necessarily had our concerns met satisfactorily, I guess is the only way to put it. And so we understand.
Hillary, you just need to stay close to your microphone. There's a bit of distortion happening. I don't know if it's your internet, but just make sure you stick close to your microphone.
Okay, sure, sorry. It's one reason why I wanted to have the shared screen, so yeah, in case we have these issues. So
Hillary, we're not able to hear you.
I'll see. I've tried to change the settings.
Do you have a headset?
Yeah, no, sorry, not a. Yeah. Let me. No, it's not working. Yeah, sorry. Is that better?
No.
So let's see if I can find my headset. Perhaps
Yes, you go. That's a bit better. I'll stop you when we can't hear you, but you carry on and we'll see how it goes.
so what we're asking is essentially for the decision that was made to undertake a full review of the plan using the streamlined planning process. We've been told that our concerns can be addressed through an engagement process. We're here to let you know that they can't. Our issues relate to fundamental parts of that process, which are checks and balances that we think are important. They are essentially that the local decision-making changes significantly when it comes to the streamlined planning process and the appeal rights. So to work through that, sorry, now my screen, my screen's playing up. Let me. Oh, so now, sorry, this is frustrating, isn't it? So now I can't see my screen. Okay, let me. Yeah, so we understand that there are parts of the plan that are outdated, that they aren't meeting community needs, and that they are likely to be changed to implement national policy. We understand that you've got tight resources, and we appreciate that you're trying to keep costs as low as possible. But what we're saying is shortcuts don't necessarily lead to better outcomes for Gisborne's communities. The standard track process is the normal and expected one to be used for plans with these wide-reaching implications. There are frustrations, but we believe they can be better addressed within the standard process rather than trying to retrofit one which was designed to meet different needs. We want to be clear, the SPP is the exception to the rule. It was introduced for those situations that did not warrant the full consultation, submission, local decision and appeal stage of the standard track process. The Auckland Unitary Plan was passed under specific legislation. It is more closely aligned to the standard track process than the streamlined one. In our view, the Auckland process is not available to you using the SPP. The application would have to try to bring back all the aspects of that the SPP specifically takes out, which makes very little sense. We've included this diagram because it's not just us saying this. This is information directly from the technical the MFE's technical guidance material. It's very clear under the SPP that the final decision rests with the Minister for the Environment. And then the appeal rights are limited. And when I say limited, for our issues, for our members' interests and for the vast majority of your community's interests, there are no appeal rights. So, and that's a fundamental concern for us. So yeah, so the point that the consultation can give us, or the process can give us what we need, is incorrect. It can't put back local decision making and that appeal right. So that's the reason. I mean, that's fundamentally our point. But we also appreciate that the standard planning process can reduce time and costs. It reduced time and cost because of those rights that have been taken away. And it gives us less rights to engage with and influence the outcomes of a plan, which will affect everyone in this region. There is no right to respond positively or constructively to what other submitters have had to say via further submissions. There is no right for a hearing in front of decision makers, no right to have local representation, representatives, retain full and final control over their plan, and no right to appeal on matters which remain a significant concern. The loss of those appeal rights cannot be put back by a robust consultation process. And to be honest, we are surprised you were comfortable with handing over your autonomy on such a significant planning instrument. We do want to be clear, this is not a self-serving position. We do not love filing appeals. We're a member-funded organisation. Appeals are a significant drain on our limited resources. We work hard through the consultation and pre-decision stages to reduce the matters which may need to be appealed. Our farmer representatives have much better things to do than sit around a mediation table, but they do it, and they do the hard yards because a resource management plan is too important to not get right. We don't have to look hard for an example of how important it is to have a safety net post-decision making to correct inadvertent errors, focus attention, and drill down into specifics. They have not yet dried on the NEU's for freshwater regulation before changes were required to address significant implementation concerns. The NES had gone through consultation, staff analysis, recommendation, and ministerial decisions. And immediate changes have been made, with more yet signalled to try and...
Mary, we're really struggling to hear you. You're just breaking up.
Guys, I am trying to shout. I'm sorry. If I was in the office, it would, yeah, we have all the technology available there, sorry. But are you able to follow the screen okay?
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about the screen as much because we have printouts of your presentation in front of you.
Okay, all right. So perhaps if we can just, I'll keep talking, but read through that, or whether you just want to have a bit of time to have a quick read and then just go straight to questions, maybe, or is it worth keeping on going?
Would Toby like to say something?
Hilary's done the grunt work with this really. I came into it quite later on after taking over from Charlie. She knows a lot more about it than me, but the biggest concern we have is the loss of the appeals rights. And the point that Hilary's trying to make here is that the government just did the environmental standards for freshwater regulations, and what we found, even though they had good, well, relatively good consultation, that there were major mistakes made straight away. And what we're more concerned about is the streamlined planning process, is that if we follow the same thing, you know, we may not have the appeal rights such as we don't now with the current regulations that have come through. So, you know, Cabinet is the only way to change some of those freshwater policies, and things like that, the low slope map and things like that aren't fit for purpose. So that's part of, you know, if we see control, or if we use a streamlined planning process, we may end up with outcomes similar to that, but then we're back waiting for a minister to be able to change it for us. That's sort of where we're coming from.
Thank you for that, Toby. So councillors, are there any questions of the floor, from the floor of our two speakers today? Kerry.
In terms of what your recommendation would be, following on from assuming that there was some, acknowledgement that this is reasonably high risk without appeals, what are you suggesting, I guess?
Yeah, so as far as the way forward goes, what we're asking for you today is to essentially revisit that decision. So the decision, or the recommendation, was to use the SPP, to undertake a full plan review using the SPP. in our view, that those recommendations weren't made with due diligence. We think there are a lot of questions still around that, and I think we've laid those points out in both that presentation once you read it and the information we provided. So what we're asking is, even if we get to just investigate whether it is the right process to use, on the undertaking that there will be good and robust stakeholder consultation undertaken through that process, that will allow us the opportunity to, maybe provide more detail around the concerns with this, although we think we're pretty clear to date. There may also be, given the, it may also be appropriate, I guess, to even revisit whether a full plan review is appropriate at this time. Given that June decision, there's been a lot of announcements made with regards to where RMA planning may go. Perhaps it's worth considering, as I mentioned in our letter, of a fifth option, which is to undertake a stage review. We're not saying a standard planning track is wrong in every instance. We're saying it can be useful, it has merit. It may have merit for it does have merit when it comes to introducing that national policy direction. And I think I saw somewhere there was about 10 reasons why the plan needed reviewing. 4 of those related to introducing national policy statements. Perhaps those can be introduced and the plan updated using a standard track process, but it would need to meet the criteria. And as I've provided in that evidence, I don't see how a full plan review can actually meet any of the criteria. And I think it is important that MFE are included before an application and actually before decisions were made to actually provide some information and discussion around that. And my understanding is that that hasn't happened. So, Councillor Woolston, we can accept appeal rights can be reduced in certain circumstances, and that is appropriate.
This is breaking up, Hilary.
It's not appropriate on a full unitary plan review. That's I guess the point we're trying to make.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Hilary and Toby, for the presentation. My question is to GDC from the summary on the position, which is the back page of the handout that we've got. Is it correct that GDC do not retain control of the process and do not make the final decisions? Because I think if we'd all known that, we might have been a little more cautious.
Through the Chair, the final plan that is ultimately recommended for the decision is decided by council.
Supplementary, Madam Chair. I'm sorry.
Just remember, questions are really for the presenters.
But we're trying to. Okay. Thank you. Yes, exactly. I was going to ask what role the minister then has, if that's a fact.
Okay, so we will we'll just finish our public deputation, and then we, as per our process, and then we can have those discussions later. Any more questions of our 2 presenters today, councillors? Hilary and Toby, hey, thank you. I am sorry that the sound was a bit wobbly. Zoom is our great friend, but only when it works very well. So we did hear, but thank you. We do have a printed copy of your presentation, and we will discuss it a little later. But we just want to thank you today for joining us, and we will catch up again.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, but like I say, that written material should help.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
you
you.
very much, Council. Have a good day.
All the best.
Okay, councillors, we now move on to extraordinary business, which we have none. No notices of missed motion or adjourned business. I take us to page 12, where we start with our agenda. I just want to set out a few ground rules for today. We have a lot to discuss, and even though it doesn't look like it, we have heaps to work through. It's all information dense report. So may I ask, please, that if you speak once. I will ask people to speak once, and I might use my discretion if we run on time to allow more, but can I please ask you to when you do take your opportunity, address what you want to address, and then I will use my discretion, but I do want to give everyone the opportunity to share their opinion today. We move to page 12, and that is a paper that talk about the key issues in our draft 2021 infrastructure and financial strategies. We have workshopped, so you will see most of the papers that we will discuss today as a council, or the councillors that attended have workshopped this thoroughly before. So lots of our questions have been answered before, but today is our opportunity again to ask the questions and debate issues that are close to our hearts. So the floor is open. Terina, would you like to give us a little discussion point, or are you just open for questions?
Your Worship, I'm open for questions.
Good. So councillors, this paper is open. Anyone have questions or queries? Like I said, we have workshopped this before, but the floor is open. I didn't mean you're not allowed to ask questions, people. Councillor Seymour.
Well, it's possibly an observation, Madam Chair, and it's pretty difficult to ask all our questions in one go, so I hope you will bear with us. I start on page 36, which is one of the graphs, and it's around the climate change. And here we are going out with a 30-year strategy, and we haven't even been to our communities with the latest information on sea level rise. So, and it's not particularly directed to the young lady who wrote the report, it's more about our own processes. So I'm looking at the very first column, which is in grey, and we're talking about a comprehensive review of the resource management system released in 2020, but it goes on, talks about the managed retreat and establishment of climate change adaptation with the implications for council infrastructure. While it says they are unclear, I really do think that before we go out with some of this data, we should be actually going to our communities and sharing that information. It says the last bullet point, we need to make decisions on how to treat private property and council assets as the risk from sea level rise and coastal erosion. And then if I move over to, well, I've marked in my, that actually, I'm sorry, it's the fourth column, it's how it was folded. 1, 2. It's the very first column has make decisions on private property. Well, we haven't gone out to our community to tell them what we perceive hypothetically is the impact. And then the same, we move over to the last grey column when you spread your page out, and the objective D in there is increasing resilience of the three waters, provision to both short and long-term risks and events, absolutely what we should be doing. And it's silent on townships, yet we're going to start charging them, hypothetically, in the rate strike. So I just think this is great, and I mean, it's a huge amount of work has gone into it. And another thing I've questioned, it's the first column in the blue on the next page over, which is 37. Population decline in rural areas may affect the viability of council services. Well, I didn't think we had many actually in our rural areas, so I'm not sure what that's really saying. But I just think it's fantastic work. It has to be done, but it really just highlighted for me, we need to get out there and talk to our communities so they understand the background, and then we go and talk to them about the 30-year strategy. If we rock up with this document when we start to consult on it, and we haven't even shared the detail of the potential sea level rise, which was planned to be done but got stopped because of COVID. I just like to think we get our ducks in a row, please. Thank you very much.
Through your worship, so the purpose of this paper is that this is around the principled approach. So I take on board your comments around the engagement with the sea level changes. My understanding was prior to COVID, there were a number of workshops, not necessarily council-led, but that were happening up the coast in particular around hazards. And then we went into lockdown, and now we're starting to do the early engagement as part of our long-term plan. This isn't the infrastructure strategy at the moment. This is what your principles or your overarching principles are that will inform that infrastructure strategy. So there's a bit more work to do before we go out with all the information to to the communities. It's about your key priorities and what you assessed as part of that workshop. It's part of a process to get there, where intention would be that would have the draft strategy around November.
Thank you, Madam Chief Executive, for that. But I do think it is, there will be pre-consultation, but that for the 10-year plan, but that is not going to allow our communities to truly understand the potential impact for them. And definitely I can think of 2 meetings that were cancelled because of COVID and not being reinstated. So we do need to do that work too. I can see that this is a big chunk of additional work, but I do think it has implications for the community, so they need to understand all of the background to it, is what I'm saying. So
Thank you, Councillor Seymour. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you, and thank you for an excellent report. I particularly like the questions posed on page 20, and I'd love to dive into them, but I'm not going to, and that's not the purpose of the report. That's for the future. But yeah, they really succinctly put some of the big priorities on our list. And also, I appreciate that in the paper, it's pointed out when we've had an opportunity as council to feed into this, so identifying those workshops up front so that we know, so that we can relate this back to when we've influenced it. One piece I wanted to question whether was potentially missing, and whilst there's mention of Māori development included in this paper, is it worth identifying the risk of resolving historic unfavourable outcomes to Māori through our during our anti-racism work? Because we're likely to unearth some disconnects between outcomes, and I think it should be highlighted as this is an issues paper that we're likely to see in the coming months or coming years.
Through your worship, so these 2 strategies sit alongside other policies within our long-term plan. One of the other policies in our long-term plan is Tairafiti Piritahi, fostering Māori participation in council decision-making. I think through that you'll see the opportunity to delve deeper into some of those issues which sit outside perhaps management of infrastructure and finance, in particular around the principles of Te Tiriti and our priorities and obligations and commitments as a council under that. So perhaps that is where that may sit.
Thank you. Yes, at a policy level around infrastructure, I was questioning whether we should be making a statement around whether we should be aligning outcomes for Māori in our infrastructure strategy if we identify any areas where there are adverse outcomes. And because it's an issue paper raising our top line issues, I felt like it fit in there. But if you feel like that's covered elsewhere, then I'm happy.
Thank you, Councillor Dowsing. I have Councillor Faulkner next in line. Councillor Faulkner, your question next, then we have Councillor Akuhata Brown.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep, all good, thank you.
Oh. So my question was page 16, the last paragraph we talk about connectivity there. And there again, it's something I know you hear me say a lot, but should we not also register our vulnerability around electricity supply? One set of supply lines into a population this size is my concern. I understand that we don't own the lines, but can we not encourage the development of both more secure supply and greater capacity?
Through your worship, kia ora, Councillor Faulkner. So, yeah, in terms of the infrastructure strategy, this is to help you determine over the next 30 years what are the key challenges and some of your options and your preferred option to addressing those challenges. We could signal that that is an issue but it does sit outside the infrastructure strategy. It's more probably aligned to, well, it is aligned to the Tairafiti Economic Action Plan refresh in terms of electricity supply. So it's more suited there, but we could signal it as a concern that we don't necessarily control.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Akuhata Brown, you next.
Morena, thank you for the explanation and the principled space that this report is, because I was trying to figure out what is it to me in the framework of our region, which has got some significant infrastructure needs, etc. So thank you. I just was looking at page 21 in respect to the options, and option C, not adopt the proposed infrastructure issues, but in that first box next to it, it says allows council more time to consider matters relating to infrastructure. So my question is, have we allowed, to cover off all things, so we're not called out that we didn't consider that or that in this space? Like, I feel like with COVID and with a whole bunch of this, what we do in this space, have we got time? Do we need more time? Are you feeling that this report is covering off all things that we need to right now? I mean, because I am very grateful for it, but I'm just cognizant. Have we got some more need of time to make sure we do diligence? Because we often are called out because of lots of reasons. So timing, if we don't adopt, what will that mean?
Through your worship, thank you for your question. While I'm not the drafter or the author for the infrastructure strategy, that's Joan Noble, who you sat through the workshop with. I think one of the key reasons we're asking you guys to adopt the issues today is to offer us the opportunity to have a framework from which to begin drafting the strategy on before we head into those further discussions. It'll be an iterative process. There will be an opportunity for you to signal if you believe there is something missing before we go out to the community. So there is still the opportunity to add if you think that the breadth and scope of the issues that we have are not complete, or if something arises in the future. But it does give us a really strong foundation from which to begin drafting the strategy itself. It has been worked through with activity managers, it has been worked through with directors, and it has been looked at from the sense of the past infrastructure strategy and with yourselves as well. So at the moment, there is a level of comfort around the issues that have been captured, but there is opportunity and scope for change in the future.
Councillor Worsnop, I'm just going to say it once, please everyone use your microphones. I feel like the microphone police. So I'm not going to say it, just use your microphones, please, everyone.
Thank you for that reminder. So I had a couple of notes in here. Probably the first one was just purely editorial. Is it hanganga or hangahanga? Because it's different in two different places. And when I looked up what it meant, it was either to make or frivolous. And so obviously the Māori dictionary didn't help me much there. So I'm assuming it means our built environment. Is that right? Is that correct? Don't know. Okay, cool.
It would have taken probably in the online dictionary.
It's just in the model where we've got spheres. Yeah. So like I say, that's just so that I know what we're talking about. In terms of the issues themselves, I've ended up drawing some lines between the financial the infrastructure strategy and the finance strategy, and the issues themselves, 1 through to 7, and then 1 through to, I think it's 8 or 9 down the bottom. With the exception of COVID, they all are actually linked to one another. They repeat themselves. Is there a reason that we don't use the same language for both? And just for the, I don't know, for simplicity's sake, like we've got, climate change will affect our infrastructure, and then down the bottom there, we've got vulnerability to climate change and natural hazards. So, it's exactly the same thing. Oh, sorry, page 13, just looking at the recommendations. So we've got the same issues in both, but they're just worded differently. And I wondered if they needed to be. And just kind of on that, one of them in particular, where it says matching the needs of our community in number 1 at E, and then at the top it's got matching the expectations of our communities now and in the future. I kind of wondered if maybe issue 5, matching the needs of our communities, was better described by servicing our communities, because when I drilled down into what it was what we were, I found that when I first looked at the recommendations, I kind of got a little bit lost, or not lost, it just wasn't very clear. Is it just because they were created separately in different workshops?
Through your worship, so there's, I guess, two parts to that question. One is the potential for some of the issues in the infrastructure strategy to be seeming to repeat themselves, and then one that we have just framed our issues differently across the two strategies. So the two strategies were built to speak to one another, but the breadth of each is slightly different. So the specificity of the issues under the infrastructure strategy are so that they just relate to infrastructure. The financial strategy does consider the prudent management of finances across all activities across council, not just those that manage our infrastructural assets. So perhaps that is where the nuance of the issue framing is slightly different. Where we have a look at those two issues, I think you said issue 5 and issue 1 for the infrastructure strategy. One is around need, so what is actually required, and then one is around matching expectations. What are the aspirations? What is the potential? And also, what are they sensing, or what are they asking for from council? So there is a slight difference there. Perhaps we could flesh it out a little bit further in the actual draft itself, but if we have a level of comfort with that description of my answer, then maybe we can move forward today.
I completely support the report and the recommendations. It was just around my interpretation of it. It wasn't, cool.
CEO.
Through your worship, I think where you've raised the point around how we've just framed it, the wording differently, I think we can tidy that up as we go forward in terms of the drafting to get the language consistent. I just want to clarify, Councillor Dowsing, in terms of your question around in the infrastructure strategy around issues or opportunities with Māori, because just reflecting and thinking about the Piritahi Tairafiti policy is around engagement and capability, capacity building. If the frame of that was from the perspective around the infrastructure needs might therefore be different than what council's traditional lens is, and if the frame is around partnering to deliver infrastructure, then I think it's more appropriate to go in the infrastructure strategy than sitting outside in the Tairafiti Piritahi policy.
Any more questions from the floor? If not, I will allow Councillor Seymour one quick more question and then we're going to move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 13 again, and it is in under bullet point 2. And if we want to be absolutely clear and consistent, it's item 4. It actually says ensure beneficiaries of services pay the costs. That's not consistent with something in the financial strategy that we're going to debate later. So if this council proposes to sheet home a 10% or 20% of the costs outside the beneficiary group, then you might need to change those words, because that's inconsistent with what we're doing in the financial strategy.
But don't you think people in our region are also beneficiaries of paying 10% of storm and waste water? They are also beneficiaries.
I don't think that's exactly what that says.
What page are you on?
13, and it's 2 and then little 4 in italics. Because 20% of a cost of something is a good deal more than just the small benefit you get on the side.
10%.
One's 10 and one's 20.
Everything's 10. We changed the 20% to 10. Any more discussion around this? Thank you, staff, for... Well, I will get there, sir. We do have a mover in Councillor Dowsing. I have a seconder in Councillor Akuhaka-Brown. If there are no more discussion, I'll put it to the floor. All in favour, contrary, carried. Thank you for that. We move on to our next paper, which is page 44. So we have given this a good thrashing in our workshops as well. So we have had several bites at this paper, and our last workshop was just last week, Paulie? Yes. So I'm going to open the floor. We're on page 44. So we're talking about the proposed changes to our revenue and financing policy. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. I'm on page 50, and I would just like it to be really clear with respect to the forestry roading rate, just so that it can absolutely be clear for the reader or the listener. Are we absolutely clear that we are asking that portion of property that has forestry on it to be valued at the land value and that rate? Because it doesn't say that anywhere.
Correct. It will be land value for forestry.
So
for mixed land
up
use.
to 20 hectares. And I'm happy to move this document, Madam Chair, but I want to move it with 50 hectares in it for the very same reason as I raised previously. 20 hectares is 4 small 5-hectare blocks as conservation plantings dotted around a property. 50 hectares is much more a commercial property. And I don't think it's really well understood what 20 hectares of forestry, as I say, it could be the accumulation of 4 or 5 small conservation blocks in gullies that are planted nowadays instead of poplar and willow on some properties. And I think that it's a huge amount of work for the valuation department to run around and find these 3 or 4 bits that come to 20 hectares. So I move the paper, but I move it with 50 hectares in the forestry block. And I think I've got one other.
It's not in the recommendations though.
Pardon?
The specifics are not in the recommendation.
No, I know, but it needs to be, and if I'm speaking to it, people need to understand what I'm supporting. Thank you. So other than that, I can't find anything else that must have not been in that document. I just think that was really important. I did raise it at the time, and I do think we do need to be cognizant of what the implications are of small conservation blocks.
For your worship, part of the consultation process and submissions should be able to pick that up. We're also engaging, having letters to all of those properties that would be affected by the new definition, and we would be encouraging them. We would state out what it is currently, but that they could have their submissions to support it, so they'll become part of the process review.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair, I totally understand that. But I just think that we ought to be about simplifying what we're trying to do in here. We're creating something which is totally reasonable, that it should be charged on a level of land, of hectareage. But then telling us that A, they have to write submissions, B, we have to find someone to read them, and C, eventually we may or may not get around to making a change decision. So I just think we are making work for ourselves and for something that is minuscule. And I don't think the example we're given that's in here is particularly helpful if I would go on to the landowners, because it talks about a block of 300 hectares, and that doesn't really make clear. And I think off the top of my head, the increase in rates is something like $3,000. And that's completely reasonable, because that's actually much more a forestry block. I'm only talking about the bits and bobs that are something relatively small, which we agree we want to capture. So putting in an example, and we did have it the other day, and it is written in here, and it's going to be in the script, but it's actually talking about 300 hectares. So nobody with 75 hectares who's probably happy to come on board, and the person with 50 can actually really see from this information what that means for them.
So, for your worship, I'd just clarify that with regards to the impacts of it, and what would they be seen in the quantums that you're actually talking that is over 20 hectares. It is minor in terms of it, that where we cut out for about $200 or $300 extra for a mixed use land, and that has got 40 hectares. So when you get down to 20, it will be minimal.
I know,
So,
but that's my point entirely. Why are we doing it on 20 hectares when it's minor? I rest my case.
Okay, before we move on to Councillor Dowsing, and who else had their hand? Oh, Councillor Foster, and then Councillor. I just wanted to ask a quick question. It's just I note at our consultation that we have hearing dates set down for the 4th and the 5th, but it's not in my diary. And I see that, is it only on the 4th?
at the time of the writing the report, we were looking at what were available dates, but it is now trying to work out the 3rd and the 4th.
No,
Oh,
second and
sorry,
the third.
2nd and 3rd.
Sorry.
Monday and Tuesday.
Apologies. So what we need to do is just quickly get those once we have the date. No, that's all good. I just noted that and didn't see it in our diaries. That's all good. I move on to Councillor Dowsing, then Councillor Akuata-Brown, and then Councillor Foster, and then Councillor Cranston.
Thank you. I think the report reflects our desire very well from our workshops, and I will, if Councillor Seymour doesn't get support, I will move it as written. And I think that, as you say, it is a negligible change, but any of those landowners who wish to see what effects it will have on their rates can go via our website in the My Rates section and see the exact change that it will make. So they'll have the opportunity to submit on that. I did really appreciate the going through the document in the attachment. Of particular interest to me was the piece around pan connections and stormwater and the little illustrations used to describe that, and I found those very useful as a communications tool. So when this goes to the community, I want to see more of that, please, because it makes it very simple. So yeah, I'm happy to move it as written if Councillor Seymour's motion to include the hectareage fails.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thank you. Just on page 54 under community engagement, there's two here, 45 and 46, and it says early engagement occurred with representatives of the forestry sector and federated farmers regarding potential changes to proportionate rates and so on. But so what have we got a response? What is the response that we've had so far from federated farmers in the forestry sector? Have they been supportive of what what this paper is about?
So, for your worship, as we've sort of communicated before what that early engagement was, it was on the forestry rate.
Yeah.
Not on all the other implications on there. It was because of the forestry, the roading rate was going up to 10 times, and we were getting from there. So they have had that early engagement. As we said, they saw what the proposals that needed to occur, and they were comfortable with it. They were comfortable also that there probably is a more of a volumetric charge in the future to assess that. But in terms of the other impacts, the early engagement was on the roading forestry rates, which was directly impacted on them.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, again, I'd like to congratulate the staff on this report. It's good. We've been through it all with all the different activities we've had prior to it, workshops. Number 46, the proposal to remove the city centre management and promotion rate has also been discussed with Trust Tairafiti. Can I get a response to that as well, please? Are we heading in the direction that we were proposing and not having the rate?
For your worships, so they are supportive of working with us around the engagement process for dropping the heart of the city centre promotion rate. And so Gavin and I will just plan out what that would look like as part of that engagement, and what services, if any, they would just not continue with as part of that discussion.
Yeah. So we'll have examples of what the not having that city centre rate will be, and what will look like for the commercial sector. Yeah. Cool. Okay, on top of that, I'm happy to second this paper as it stands if Councillor Seymour doesn't get support for hers.
Councillor Cranston, the floor is yours.
Yeah, mine was a carry on from Councillor Foster. Really, it's about clarity of the role. I mean, I know TT have been undertaking it for a while, but I think there needs to be absolute clarity of the role, because it's management and promotion, and management can mean many things to many people. So setting the expectation of them doing the work, I think we need to be quite robust in how we handle that. And why I sort of came to that was because of the issue around the cameras and the camera trust, where that absolutely needs to be carried on. And I see you looking at moving it on to the business area patrol. Is that going to increase the amount that's going into that to cover that? And when we're talking about the cameras, are we talking about just a maintenance amount of money, or are we talking about, you know, actually developing that asset more?
In terms of this proposal that it was there. It was based on 2019-20. So that it was the rate that was there was about $15,000 for doing that. If there is additional things that needs to come, that would come out of the long-term plan process and what your priorities are with regards to increasing that service or not. But this is about the allocation of how it will be rated for. Councillor Burdett.
Page 45, third paragraph down. Proposed changes will reduce the rates by a small amount.
Microphone, please.
Residential properties in Gisborne will increase the rates for multi-unit rating units, including retirement villages. The proposed changes will also increase, note this, the rates for pastoral and horticulture farms in rural townships by a small amount, and for land use as forestry by a larger amount. The forestry thing I'm not going to talk about. We all know that in our villages, they struggle. And there's a high level of unemployment in most villages. So why is it we are setting out to give the city, and I've said this before, the city a discount, and yet we go to the productive sector, which I don't mind so much, but the villages, they're expected to pay extra too. And I personally don't think that's right. On top of it, where does the consideration come into this in terms of the discount in the city when you've got valuations going up by huge amounts, which will give council more revenue? You also have, in the terms of what we had decided earlier, a 3.2 rise in rates. How's this figured into all this?
Ms. Foreman. Thank you, Councillor.
There's a couple of things in there. This isn't about collecting more rates. It's about reallocating it. So it's who pays the share of the pie. This is so basically we won't collect more rates from it. It's just who.
I understand that side of it perfectly. You explained that previously.
Yep. So the second part of that is when you were looking as part of the review, we started perhaps in March where there was a broad stroke to look at affordability, because we know that affordability across the district was caused by a high UAGC. And then there was a second affordability within the city, which was driven by the high fixed rates for infrastructure services. As part of the review, rather than the broad stroke of reducing the UAGC by 100 or 200, you felt the better way of approach of doing this was to look at the activities and then look at affordability issue per se. So the outcome of that, when you did that, the review of the infrastructure costs, most of that still stays within the city. 90% of it stays within the city. So if you're going to redistribute or say that the cost of the household needs to be the same as another household, which is what we were doing with the different types of rates, the same per pan or whatever the cost onto that service needed to be realigned. And when you do that, that changed the distribution within those that were receiving the rate. So if people weren't rated for it, there couldn't be a reallocation for something that they didn't receive. And to give you a little bit of a comparison of what that affordability does within the city versus elsewhere for the low value properties, same low value property, Elgin compared to a same low value property, rural, you're talking probably 1,300 in rates per annum in a rural. You're talking within the city for that low value is 2,500, just 2,400. So that $1,000 extra that was caused predominantly by the fixed rates of the infrastructure was an affordability issue there. So this distribution or reallocation was trying to assess what those impacts were. The rural ratepayer or rural residential ratepayer is by and large unaffected. It stays the same. So the types of where it was occurred and what were the major changes for most of that was the reallocation of 90% of the wastewater within its own city ratepayers and the stormwater, I should say. They were the two things.
Thank you for that, Ms. Foreman. Any more discussions? Councillor Akuata Brown.
Just on page 85, there's got the target audiences, and I think of sustainable Tairafiti. There's a voice not quite in the mix, which for so many they'd say, well, they don't understand rates, etc. And that's young people, our young people. And I was thinking when I look at that target audience, because of large portions of dialogue around our nation currently around who's going to pay in respect to the future generations, etc. And I wondered, could our youth council or others involved in add kind of some context or kind of considerations to how they will inherit the decisions we make, because often we tend to complain about that at some point in our lives. So I'm just wondering, is there a space or an opportunity? Now, I don't want to create more work because Pauline and all the staff are working very hard. I want to thank you for that, Pauline, for all the workshops, etc. But I just feel rates, when you're saying let's talk rates, there's an opportunity to talk with a broader scope of our youth, young people in the region who, are looking at buying homes, etc. So I don't know where you target them at particularly, but I think maybe our youth council could be a starting point, because I'd love to hear just some more of their views to the future of our regions in the sustainable space. That's my thinking around the target.
Specifically, they haven't been targeted, but there are sort of the media or electronic media that we're trying to do with more webinars and making that kind of connection in there. But particularly they haven't, but part of the pre-consultation process there is trying to engage more, and there is a presence of that particular topic. The main ones that we were looking for one-on-one areas were the areas that were highly impacted. So that was kind of the emphasis, but yeah.
Supplementary, I just want to thank you for the work. In the 7 years I've been at this table, this is an area that, getting your head in this game isn't easy. So to all those listening today, rates is a touchy one as to who pays, and as Mr. Councillor Burdett has noted, who pays where and all the shiftings. But believe you me, we've been hashing this out and we are working our best to make sure it's fair and affordable. It's not easy, but thank you for all the work. Kia ora.
Thank you for that. Councillor Worsnop.
I was just wondering if we could take the points under recommendation 1 separately. The recommendations, whatever page they're on. And so, because it's a public meeting and we are supposed to be accountable to our public, I will I guess reinforce my view all the way through that if the intention with redistributing the general rate was affordability, and I do notice in our publicity, our material that is intended for the public, it does talk about sharing the cost of delivering water activities. Being shared across all ratepayers means low-income households are more likely to be able to pay their rates. I would like it added that it is specifically urban low-income households, not all low-income households, because quite clearly, as Bill has pointed out, it does not apply and does not help if you are rural and low-income living in a low-value property. And just to drill down into that, how do we determine our affordability? Thank you. You gave us an example of the fact that low-income household will be paying higher rates in the city relative to a township. That is helpful. However, we also use a bunch of other ways of working out affordability, and in the material that we were provided with, we were given household income as the rates as a proportion of household income. I think in the top 10, or actually I think it's 6th, is Tikaraka at 5.9% of their household income is spent on rates. We're not helping them at all with this, and I don't think we really looked very hard at how to. If you look at who has the most debt, which we also use as a proxy for who can afford to pay their rates, in the top 10 you've got East Cape, Tokomaru Bay, Ruatoria, Wharekahaka and Tineroto. So we do have affordability issues that are outside the region that we have not addressed in this. And we also did not go into at what point does the capital value get high enough in the city to essentially mean that you are no longer a beneficiary of the redistribution of the water rates. Is it $600,000 where you're saving $150? Is it $1 million? At what point is your property high enough value that you're no longer getting a drop in your rates, while somebody who's in a rural township earning not a lot doesn't see any of that benefit? So I maintain that we didn't get the balance right on that one. I'm really supportive of the other ones, and I also do appreciate the work that's gone into this. But yeah, for the sake of being consistent, those are my points.
Thank you for that. Ms. Foreman.
Just probably on the latter point, where you're talking the 90%, if you like, of the reticulated services, how was that distributed? And so if you like, the models before, when we had 3 and 4, we actually addressed one where we said you could put in a affordability measure in there, and we said, what if 10% of the capital value, or a 20%? And that were models 3 and 4. When the decision point that came at that particular point was to say that based on the principle that what was the share of the costs and who was providing it, that overrid the assessment of a subjective qualitative measure of the affordability. And so therefore the model that was produced was without that CV value adjustment in it. However, as part of this that goes through to consultation, you'll get some of the feedbacks. There is part of the review that you do. If it doesn't feel right in some of the things, then you have that section 101.3b, which says, what are the other impacts that we take into account? That is your remissions, that is the overview look of it as well. And so effectively, that was a principled decision at that time that said, we want to take that value, the capital value out of the city rate of the 10% and the 20%.
Thank you for that. Any more questions around this paper? I just want to comment stuff and say thank you. I've noticed in the last while that we do proper workshops beforehand, and I really appreciate that, because at the end of the day, we bring 14 different opinions and 14 different representations to the table. And at the end, we need to make a decision that is a majority or the majority voice. And it's not always easy. And I do want to say often, and especially councillors that have been around the table for quite some time, rates is a blunt tool. It is never perfect. We try our best every year, every 3 years when we review them, to be fair and more fair. But unfortunately, there are always unintended consequences or effects that we can't take account for. So I just want to acknowledge staff for the work they've done for us, but I also want to acknowledge the councillors around the table. We've done a lot of work around this before, and this is what we will be going out to our community. And this is not set in stone. This is us talking to our community, getting feedback, and then we will make decisions come our long-term plan time. Any more discussions around this? Councillor Seymour.
Just one scripting on 62, and it goes back to what Councillor Burdett and Worsnoff have been talking about, and it's actually under city affordability. And then it says this proposal, because it's a new paragraph, has no impact on properties not receiving services. And while it probably, as we read it, is directed at city, maybe it can be just made clearer that it's directed across the region, because otherwise, you know, people are going to read that and it just sounds like it's only directed at the city, whereas it's not.
For your worship, it is.
It is the direct, yeah, I mean, I should say, I know it is directed at the city with no service, but it's going to be read by those reading the document who also have no service and think it's not meaning them. I know you're talking about it in relation to the city, which might be half a dozen properties that don't get reticulated service, But if you read it in that context, it could also relate to townships that get no service. So can you just either put it in the same paragraph as city or give it a heading? Thank you. Just in the...
Okay, so let's move on. No more discussions around the table. Councillor Seymour moved the paper with a 50 hectare caveat in the paperwork. Are there a seconder for that?
Yeah.
Councillor Burdett. Pauline.
Can I say that the risk that we are doing with a 50, we've got within Let's Talk rates, it's with the 20. And so all the information that we've had going ready for the 14th, we will have to delay consultation in order to get that out, because the statement of proposal will have to reflect that and all the Let's Talk rates, because the modelling is based on the 20, as we said before.
Just
Okay.
Quickly.
Right of reply, quick right of reply.
Very quick. I get that, Pauline, and I totally, Ms. Foreman, I totally understand, but I just have to say that it was arisen because we didn't vote on some of these things. We just had easy conversations, and most noise got into the document. If we'd have voted on things as we went along.
I am just going to use my chairperson privileges right now. We did clearly on that day discuss 50 versus 20, and it was very clear, steer to staff going forward, that the majority view was a 20. It was not everyone, but I just want to make it very clear that on that day we gave Pauline a very clear steer that the majority of councillors agreed with the 20, because there was such a tiny difference. I remember Councillor Warsnop asked for the numbers, and it was so negligible that we then decided to do 20. So,
but we didn't vote.
Well, we didn't have to vote. It was a workshop. All in favour? Okay, so what I'm putting to the table now is Councillor Seymour proposal with the 50 that she moved, and Councillor Burdett seconded. All in favour? Contrary? No. Lost. I've got a proposal to move the paper as is. It's moved by Councillor Dowsing, seconded by Councillor Foster. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. I do apologise. I just realised you did ask for to move them. Can I go back and do that? Well, it's noted what you said. It's not going to make a difference to the outcome, but it is noted what you said. Do you, is it allowable for me to go back? I apologise for that. All good. Cup of tea time. Okay, councillors, we are back in business. Exciting paper ahead of us. This has been, we've all that's been on the council for quite some time have been part of this in the planning. And I'm very, very excited to see that we are looking into this. So Mr. Hatfield, do you want to have a quick chat? Because not all councillors were part of this before.
Okay. There's just 4 steps. With the roading program, it's already gone to the regional transport committee. So some of the members have probably already got a glimpse of what's in the future, but we'll bring that back and there'll be a discussion this afternoon. Just for points of clarity, bullet point 14, it says Auckland Transport have released their capital program. When we were drafting the report, the Auckland Transport, they're reviewing how they're going to match their rates demand. And so at this stage, we've heard they're starting to reduce their program. So we'll know when, in 2 months' time, whether it's going to be allocated or not. So, and the last thing I just want to talk about, is also the maps. And I just want to thank Sally in terms of input there. So that was basically just focused in the urban areas, but there's a good point we need to talk about the regional. So it's not the point today, it's just to give us some indications. So the last thing, this is just the first step. We've also got to go to Waka Kotahi to get funding from them, and then there's that process. So it's just a small step.
Any questions or queries? I'm happy to move this paper. Councillor Foster.
I was just going to say I was happy to move this paper, but the thing is how you've moved it, I'm happy to second it. I think a fantastic report. It's been around for quite a while, and it's an obvious extension to our walkway systems that we have now, and it'll certainly allow all our Whakatāhi to get to school at a safe place on a cycle and walk or run.
Good, thanks.
And skateboard even. So bring it on.
Great. So I just had one question of you, Mr. Hatfield, and I took a look at the back when we spoke about climate change. One of the issues around this walkway is that quite a bit of it originally, the boardwalk bits, and I just want to make sure when we do go into our design that we do take our climate change issues seriously in the design, that it is in places where water won't reach it, and because some of these bits were quite low. So I just want to flag going forward that as we look at all projects with a climate change lens, that we make sure the design is future-proofed to accommodate for climate change. I have Councillor Dowsing, and then I have Councillor Cranston, and then Robertson. Thank you.
Thank you. And I didn't want to comment too much on the maps. There's some great options in there, but I just wanted to say that it would be helpful to see an inclusive map of both the west and east. I know it'd be compressed a little bit, but it's. I understand there's a couple of bottlenecks there with only 2 bridges coming across, but it would be nice to understand how those who may use this to travel the furthest to get to our secondary schools are shepherded into those pathways, and you don't necessarily get the flow through without seeing the whole map.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, absolutely supportive of this. Have been for quite a while, and encouraged to see it. It was actually on our last long-term plan for 21 to 24, I think, but not as a definite. So this makes it more of a definite, which is fantastic. We've taken through the spatial planning commitment to get 80% of the kids to school, and there's no way we're going to get anywhere near that without this. But there's also the hospital, which you go up there and there's 300-400 cars there any day too, so it's going to give them good cycling access as well, so it's helping out climate change sort of issues there. So very supportive of it. Great to see it happen, so bring it on. Just with the 62,000, I'm kind of hoping that reflects work done to date, because Urban Solutions did a lot of work on this, so that's already in existence. So does the new business plan sort of come in after that, or is that in the bottom drawer and we start again sort of thing, which does happen here sometimes? So yeah.
Yes, just to address that point, yeah, exactly, with climate change, those designs didn't take into account potential climate change. So we're going to have to get them out, see what we can try and use, and then there might have to be some points that there was potentially bridges. Well, do they have to be raised? Things like that. So, yeah.
Thank you. I have Councillor Robinson and then Councillor Akuhata Brown.
Kia ora, Dave. I'm actually not over the moon about this report and really concerned about us spending money for a feasibility study, which is then going to potentially commit us to 2.3 million, which we don't have, when I can't reconcile the general plans. Okay, so there's 8 plans attached in this report. And as I go through the plans, they seem to involve the Tairawhiti waterway less and less and less. So do you have some solid data and costings around other options and safety and user friendliness, et cetera, because I'm looking at, for example, the plan on page 103, which seems to be using Aberdeen Road as a primary source to get bodies on bicycles to the west of the city. Obviously, it doesn't involve any money, or maybe a little tiny weeny bit of, what's that colour, aqua. I'm really interested to know what the other options are and what the other pricing options might look like, because, and is our $200,000 feasibility study going to really address those other options and the costings for those, or is it only going to be looking at plan 1, which is map on page 100? And if so, how much of that, is it just the yellow? Is it the yellow and the aqua? What is it?
Thank you, Councillor Mr. Hatfield.
Yes. So the planning, all the options were they're going to come back to council to look at the level service over the whole area. But one thing that we did miss out is that we should have included the regional areas in terms of the stop banks. And then, because what I did is I focused on what could get funded from Wakakotahi, but it didn't actually look at the stop banks in some of the townships, which need to be put into a regional walking cycling plan. Okay, so if your question about the Tairawhiti, that was because it was in the LTP, the existing fund, and so there've been studies specifically for that, and this business case is just targeting that route and that project, because the designs itself, potentially consents, are going to cost up to that 200,000.
Supplementary question, Chair. Madam Chair, so looking at plan 100 on page 100, do you have it in front of you? Are you saying that $200,000 feasibility study is just to look at the routes in yellow and aqua up to the Stanley Road?
Yes, that's right. Because if you, after central government funding, anything over $2 million, that they want a better business case, because they're going to be putting in a lot of money as well.
So that's not my question about the funding. My question is, what part of this route is the feasibility study to look at, and which route are we looking at?
It's the aqua and yellow.
People are giggling around the aqua bit. We just call it turquoise, but aqua is lovely as well. Thank you for that. Any more, CEO?
Through your worship, so just in response to the other options that have been looked at in Aberdeen Road, there's been quite a substantial amount of work that has gone in previously, looking at separated cycleways, how you might treat the roading corridor, whether you increase the footpath. So that, while that's not the focus of this particular one in terms of the Tairawhiti route, that has been looked at. The information now is quite outdated, so we'll have to get new costings on everything. Similarly with Tairawhiti, there was some work that kind of did an estimate around what it might cost, some of the issues around consenting and constraints. So we do need to go back and refresh that information.
Kia ora. Any more questions? Councillor Akuata Brown and then Councillor Burdett. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, for bringing this to our attention in this sustainable Tairafiti space, because being here and seeing iterations of this is exciting. I remember being at a meeting with the transport agency, telling them that it's imperative that we do something to get all our young people from one side of town to the other safely in this current situation we have with our region. So it's good to see this is still here with us. My question to you today is simply, the barriers and the concerns. We're talking about furthering, looking at this in the wider context, climate change mitigation, and, getting this project, people getting excited about it and on board with it. Did you learn lots from the previous discussions about those who were opposed it, etc.? So we don't have to go there with this feasibility. We already have that information, or do you have to keep that information in the mix in the new speaking to this project?
If we get to the construction phase, there will be not opposition. There'll be people who won't be as supportive because it'll be like intruding into their backyard. And so, and we've had similar experiences, but we're hoping that now that the walkway down Oniroa, that people see the benefits, and that's what we've got to try and sell.
And this is looking at it from a multimodal, scooters, wheelchairs, all access for this particular project too. It's not, so a lot of people think cycleways, but they don't realise we have a lot of walkers, we have a lot of people, we use mobility scooters, etc. So that's all part of this corridor, isn't it?
Your central government is wanting us to change our language to include that, because it's just saying we're just looking at walking, cycling, and they believe it's limiting other options.
Any more questions? Councillor Sheldrake. Oh, sorry, Councillor Petit, you go first, and then Councillor Sheldrake. Thank you.
Dave, I've gone straight to the risk area, page 99, 29 and 30. The main risk is financial 2.3 of external factors not defined by 221. Council's land transport bid for walking and cycling projects to Waka Kotahi will be prioritised accordingly, but the second risk is reputational. I think the alarming thing below that is that if we are not successful, we won't have any walking and cycling projects for 10 years. Does the requirement that Waka Kotahi put on us that these projects need to have a $2 million cost, or the project itself cost that before they'll come to the party?
No, they always like to know if you've got, certainly when you get to the phase where they call it over allocation. So other councils around New Zealand are all putting walking and cycling projects up, and the GPS is signalling a strong desire in terms of climate change and to different different alternative modes of transport. But the issue I wanted to raise is more when it's over allocated, then they go to the councils and say, have you got the local share? But it's only at that phase. We don't know yet, because at the moment they're still trying to put, we're still wanting to know other councils' bids. That's all.
Thank you.
Any more questions after Councillor Sheldrake?
No, thank you. In fact, Councillor Beattie just touched on what I was interested in around the timing and the money, but obviously very pro cycling and walking, and just that multiple use is a really, really important factor. I know riding behind Mitre 10 now, that's a hell of an improvement to what it was. So the actual construction of it, is it intended to be what?
We haven't gone to those details yet. Because we've still got to go through the business case, and it's working out all the benefits. That's just part of the process.
Right.
I'm just checking because I've also got councillors on Zoom. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Sorry for taking a second bite.
That's
but
all right.
I just wanted to ask, there's a preference currently in region for painted cycle lanes and shared pathways as built so far. We've got options here for separated cycleways and bicycle boulevards, which we don't currently have any of. What I wanted to get to was, is there any opportunity to advance some of this program in some of these logical spaces with painted cycle lanes? It seems like we could be implementing a lot of that for low cost in a lot of these identified areas that are clearly mapped on all of these plans as wanting to have something, but not having a big infrastructure budget for separated cycleways. Thank you.
That's a discussion point we'd like to bring back to the council about level of service. Okay, and that's explain to you all the different types of options that can come back. And can I say that the younger the person who's using, or we want to use it, then there's more protections that you should putting in place, and they don't feel comfortable or going onto a road. And those are the trade-offs that you have to make as a council. And so that's a discussion we'd like to come back and we'll sort for your input.
Yeah, to that point, I'd indicate that something is better than nothing, and we can always improve it later on. So.
Thank you for that. Well, I've got a mover in myself, a
Yes,
seconder
yes.
in Councillor Foster. No more discussion. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you. We move on to our next page is our draft freedom camping bylaw. Who is the person? Hey, Chris. Chris. I just want to, so I'll open this paper. Chris, if you want to make some comments, but I've had some questions raised, and I see an option for us is as a council from page 122, where we can go through those bits and just rejig those if we need to. But thank you for this paper, and also thank you for the workshop you have organised for us around this. Any discussion you want to share with us, and then Councillor Robinson asked if he could have us.
All right, fantastic. Through the chair, thank you, councillors. There are just a couple of points to make about the report and the statement of proposal. They contain the same for November date that has already been discussed, needs to be amended for the hearing. So that will be amended on the final documentation, second or third, I think, of the dates that are currently being discussed. Number two, the statement of proposal contains an error in the permit figures. That is a product of we received a late change to some of our data that was calculated for us by finance. The correct figure is in the report. That is sorry, I don't have your page numbers in front of me, but the paragraph is 26. The statement of proposal figure is incorrect and will be adjusted to reflect what is in the report. And then finally, folks, adding to my numerous spelling errors, there's also a numbering error as well in the discussion section of the report with regards to our questions that won't have an impact on today. I'm just highlighting that for you now. That's everything from me.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson and then Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that this report lie on the table. My reasons for it are such. I've gone back through the report that was provided to Council on the 11th of June and gone back through the workshop document, because when I read this report in anticipation of today, I was surprised to see some significantly new figures and new data. The reference to $2.8 million as the anticipated economic benefit to the community, to this region, was a new figure, but I noted the report does not say how a restriction in freedom camping may negatively impact upon that economic input into our community, which is something I want to know before I make a decision, something we should probably all consider before we make a decision. When I carefully analyse the RFS data on page 117 and 116 of the report, I can't reconcile the two charts. For example, the RFS chart 1, reduced amenity, 2019 there were 30 RFSs. That's the most in any year on reduced amenity. Chart 2 suggests that for Gisborne City, reduced amenity had 35, but it doesn't say what year. And the charts don't break down between freedom camping and summer camping. So it is next to useless, in my opinion, as a guide in determining community concerns or otherwise, unless that data is broken down. When I go through carefully the rationale contained in this report, I'm very concerned that simply there is not a strong enough rationale for us to make an informed decision on this. And overall, when I'm told that this bylaw would not be in place in time to be effective for the upcoming summer camping season, then I think that we could have time to actually further consider these things. It has been suggested to me, Madam Chair, that the community feedback would address these concerns, but the community relies upon us to have put our brains in gear and put forward a good, sound proposal for them to communicate, for them to comment on, not us rely upon them to pick up the faults or concerns. They're not going to know whether the economic impact of reducing the number of sites in the city by 60%. They're not going to know that stuff. We should know that stuff before we start making these decisions. The reality is Other districts in the Motu are making freedom camping next to impossible. We have an opportunity in Tairafiti to exercise our manaakitanga and actually embrace freedom camping, but put around some really good controls and measures. We have an opportunity to differentiate ourselves and celebrate our region. And I don't want us to rush forward today and take this out to the community. I want us to take some time. We have that time available to us because we're not going to have this ready for this coming season, and actually do some more due diligence on this. For those reasons, I think this paper should lie on the table until we can actually come back with some further information.
Thank you for that. So I assume my next question is, Ms. Khan, to ask if there's support to let it lie on the table, because if someone going to second that, because if it lies on the table, there's no discussion to be had. So the process is that we first ask, is there a desire to let it lie on the table? Yep.
If this was to lay on the table, would we still have time frame next year to consult on this, to implement it in time for the next season? So to lay on the table now is not an issue for actually implementing it in the time frame we desire. In which case I'll second.
I'll move that this paper lie on the table, moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Dowsing. All in favour? Contrary? No. Okay, let's move back. All in favour, hands up. So that it lie of letting it lie on the table. What can be lost by giving it a good thrashing?
Yes. Ask, just for clarity, what specifically we're waiting for though?
Okay. What we have on the table is Councillor Robinson that flagged that he would like more information. Councillor Dowsing asked of staff if it's okay to have more discussions. Will it delay our time frame to consult? Mr. Gilmore said, no, there is still enough time. We're not on a tight time frame because we are not addressing it for this camping period. Is that correct? Shh. Can Mr. Gilmore please speak for the CEO?
Through your worship, the status quo will apply, as Councillor Seymour has suggested. We run summer camping starts when daylight savings occurs, so any bylaw needs to be put in place prior to that. So there is a lot of time.
Okay, so what we have on the table at this stage is a mover to say, let the paper lie. Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Dowsing. All in favour to let the paper lie, please put your hand up. Okay, it's carried. Against, carried. This paper lie on the table, and we will, yes, if you can just please come up with specifics you want out of this, that would be good.
So
there's no discussion around this paper now, Councillor Foster. Once it's lying on the table, there's no discussion on the paper.
Just a point of clarification would be the rationale for letting it lie on the table was because of a $2.8 million economic benefit figure. And
what else?
There was a now 2.8 million, but no evidence as to how reducing the freedom camping might impact upon the economic benefit to our community. There was, yeah, a number. I'll write them down and see them first.
Thank you. You've got it on the minutes. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. We move to page 167. Where we will talk about new directions. This is a noting report for resource management report summary. Who will be talking? Alice. Welcome, Alice. So do you want to have a little chat and then we'll open it to questions?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick summary.
So the comprehensive review of resource management system was commissioned last year because the RMA is no longer fit for purpose. We're facing several issues that have not been adequately addressed by the RMA. This includes increasing pressure on the natural environment, urban areas not catering for population growth, urgent need to reduce carbon emissions and adapt to climate change, and the need to ensure Māori have an effective role in the system. So the proposal is that a Natural and Built Environments Act will be enacted, as well as a Strategic Planning Act and a Managed Retreat and Climate Change Adaptation Act in place of the RMA. So the Natural and Built Environments Act aims to give effect to Te Tiriti. It has the requirement for combined plans, proportional information requirements for consenting, so small activities wouldn't have the large information requirements. Yeah. Sustainable resource allocation, so not the first in, first served model that is currently. Improved compliance, monitoring and enforcement by sort of separating that role out from council. A more active central government partnership, protecting and enhancing the natural environments instead of mitigating the effects on it. Encouraging urban development, addressing climate change, and better aligning the system with Te Ao Māori. So.
Thank you for that, Alice. Any questions around this paper? Councillor Akuhata Brown.
Thank you, Alice. And I see the other reading in the mix as well. And so, of course, most of us who have had to listen to lots of dialogue around RMA are grateful for this process right now. I just wanted to know, one of the, I guess, increasingly we're seeing a push for regional kind of constructs around certain environmental factors, be it water, etc. So do you see this kōrero having some positive push, because of our natural landscape, Tairafiti, our uniqueness and all those factors? Are you seeing there being a push in a regional sense, or there's still that understanding of our unique landscape environments, but we're not being kind of pushed into that? I'm just interested because that's been talked of recently.
Through your worship, it is the requirement for combined plans, like because for us, because we're already a unitary authority, we already have to undertake that. But say for Hawke's Bay, they have to, all the TAs have to get together with their regional council and draft a plan. So we're already kind of in that space, and that works to our advantage. But I think it would definitely be of benefit in terms of, for example, water, because they're looking at principles for sustainably allocating water instead of just whoever kind of has had that right or whoever gets in first. So I think it's definitely a positive step for Tairafiti.
Right. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, it might be for Chief Executive. Just what degree do you see an impact on this new legislation and the process that Council is embarking on with respect to reviewing our own district plan? And is there a intention to seek some clarity out of this new government direction before we go to decide down the road on our own?
Yep, so through the Chief Executive, we've been aware of the changes that have been coming through. There's likely to be some impact. The degree to which is uncertain, but at this stage, given the timing that they'll take to draft any bill, for that to come into effect as well. We do know that with the freshwater plan process, which is very much part of the overall review as well, that will stay the course, because we've got until end of 2024 before we have to have those done. And we will keep close connection in with MFE around our streamlined process to make sure that we are responding to any signals that come by way of changes. I actually think this is a really good opportunity for us in terms of that process, in terms of streamlining it. I think there's an opportunity for us to also potentially pilot some of the work that we're doing in a partnership with MFE. So I don't think that that we would lose work in terms of it would be a waste of work in terms of what we're currently progressing.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Bill Burdett, do you want to speak or move? Yep. Did I have a seconder off the floor? Councillor Sheldrake. Councillor Woosnell.
My question, assuming that we do this all in one, our own TOMP review, how often would we typically undertake a review? And because even a streamlined version is likely to take us some time, and it's unlikely to be fully aligned with whatever different acts, because we're talking about a number of acts, not one act, and potentially they may be drafted at different, they may, become acts at different times. We are probably further down the track with having our spatial plan, even though it probably doesn't technically fit the proposed definition under the proposed act. We're close, right? We've done more work than most. My question is, how are we addressing the fact that we may risk doing the process twice within a period of years rather than, once? I understand that you've said we could try and fit together, but we would be trying to fit in with something that's probably going to be backwards and forwards between political parties for a number of years till they find enough common ground to pass it. So therefore, there can't be a lot of certainty in that. How often would we typically have to revisit it?
Thank you. Through your worship. So at the moment in the RMA, you have to review every 10 years, but there's also requirements under national policy statements that you have to incorporate those within certain timeframes depending on the policy statement. So we are constantly having to change anyway, but there may be new requirements in the Natural Environments Act. But as Nadine mentioned, I think that by the time the new government act, by the time we have an election, so we have certainty around the government, and then seeing what gets picked up out of this report from there, by the time it's actually drafted, I think we have the opportunity to work with MFE to kind of know what they're going to be signalling. So yeah, so does that answer your question?
Thanks, Alice.
Through the chair, there's been an integrated planning type approach. So while it's not statutory,
can you just speak up a little bit?
There's been an integrated planning approach taken towards the development of our LTP, the spatial plan that you've seen, and then when you eventually review your TRMP. So that really is where the intent of this review is kind of going around, integrating those plans, the RLTP, LTP, RMA, and all those planning things. And so there's a framework there that we're attempting to implement at the moment in terms of activity management plans and the like. So trying to understand how that trickles down without the pressure of it being a statutory requirement yet. So I believe if this does happen, there's some framework there that obviously will need to be amended once the direction is set, but there's been attempts made already.
CEO.
Through your worship, and I think it's really important to remember that the driver for a streamlined process was around the fact that our plan is not fit for purpose. So we have not reviewed some of our chapters of our plan. We are outdated. The stuff that we've done is essentially combined and removed repetition without a fundamental look at that. So our drivers were such around needing to review old plans and come up to date. And also address some of the fundamental issues that were happening and preventing growth in the region. So for us to then, I would say we should not be sitting back and waiting for government policy to change, recognising we have some fundamental current flaws in our plan. What we need to be doing is taking the high level signals, i.e. te mana o te wai, and incorporating that in our engagement with iwi around how we do that and developing and co-creating plans going forward. And really robust community engagement that withstands the government policies of the day. So, so that's my response in terms of why we would continue down this pathway, knowing that there are reforms, but if we are taking on board those signals and we are applying really good, robust community engagement, this should withstand a lot of the changes.
Okay, so for this noting paper, I have a mover in Councillor Bedette. I have a seconder in Councillor Sheldrake. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you. So we move to the last paper. Thank you, Alice. We move to the last paper today, and that's a presentation on the Action for Healthy Waterway package. Who is going to do that? Is Joe Keita, is Joe going to be on Zoom? So Miss Noble is on Zoom. Welcome, Joe.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can turn it maybe up a little bit, Heather.
I can turn mine up if needed.
You turn it up a little bit, Joe, and then we're all good to go. Thank you. And we
Okay,
are,
just do that. Have you got the presentation in front of you?
it's on our screen. Thank you,
Great.
Joe.
How is that for volume?
All good. Thank you.
Okay, let's just get so I can see what you can see. I can't see the presentation, so I'm going to have to guess where you're up to.
We're at the purpose now.
Okay, so this is really a brief introduction. I know some of you are quite familiar with the package that government recently released on freshwater. So it's a brief introduction to that package, a very brief update of the work currently underway within council and next steps. If we can have the next slide. So for those of you who maybe haven't kept entirely up to speed, the whole package of work that's been released by MFE is new national policy direction, rules and regulations, and it's all intended to halt any further degradation of fresh water and improve water quality sort of within an ambitious 5-year timeframe. And so it's about reversing past damage and meeting those long-term aspirations for the state of fresh water to a healthy state, maintaining the Māori within a generation. So there are different components to the package. One is the national policy statement. So that came into effect on the 3rd of September. So it's now live and replaces the existing national policy statement that's been around in various iterations for some years. There are new national environmental standards for fresh water, which are essentially regional rules that we have to pick up and use in place of our regional plan rules. There's a staggered implementation timeframe for those, so different rules come into play at different times. And there's new stock exclusion regulations, which again are like rules that we have to pick up and implement, and updated regulations for measuring and reporting water takes. So quite a comprehensive package of both new policy direction that has to be incorporated within our planning and decision making, and new rules that take effect immediately. So next slide. This is my attempt to bring together the framework around fresh water with the focus on the Resource Management Act. And I've also put up there the Treaty of Waitangi and the Waitangi inquiry that's been going through the Waitangi Tribunal on freshwater rights and interests, with a focus on Māori rights and interests in freshwater and geothermal water. And just to note that we are still waiting for the government response on the findings from the tribunal on that claim. And that is likely to be a further piece of national direction at some point that influences the work that we do around freshwater. For Tairafiti, we also have the Environment Court proceedings that are underway on our current freshwater plan. That hearing is at the end of this month. And again, that's about Māori rights and interests, particularly around ownership of freshwater. So the outcomes of that hearing might have some bearing on where Tairafiti goes in terms of freshwater management. So we have the national direction sitting at the top under the RMA. In there is a clear direction to give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai.
Can you just quickly repeat what you have just said around the hearing at the end of the month?
So the Environment Court,
Akai.
yeah, Te Whanau Akai appeal on the freshwater plan. The Environment Court hearing on that appeal is set down for the end of this month. And that will be in Gisborne. Okay. So national direction, national policy statement is the key piece of policy, and then we have the various rules off to the side that basically fit straight into our regional rule book. And there will be a big job there to go through and work out which rules take precedence and to remove duplication and conflict. In terms of what happens in the Tairafiti Resource Management Plan, there are changes needed to the regional policy statement provisions to give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai, and then that will flow through into the rest of the policies and rules and catchment plans. So I've just flagged on the next slide some of the key changes with a focus on Tairafiti. So obviously giving effect to Te Mana o Te Wai is a change. When you're told in RMA terms to give effect to something, that's a very firm, very strong direction, and it places a strong obligation on council to review and make changes to its Tairafiti resource management plan to ensure that you are implementing Te Mana o Te Wai. It's not something you just sort of take into account and can weigh up against other interests. So Te Mana o Te Wai has a set of guiding principles and a hierarchy of obligations, which I will just touch on more in the next slide. There's also a very strong message in the MPS, and it's come through in the recommendations about RMA reform, about more active involvement of Tāngata Whenua, for example, looking at joint management mechanisms. So some of the more significant areas of change for Tairafiti will be Te Mana o Te Wai and developing a regional application, what that means for Tairafiti and long-term vision. Incorporating Mātauranga Māori, there's a new effects management hierarchy for streams and wetlands that introduces this concept of avoiding loss and no net loss. So that's a new approach that isn't taken in the current Tairafiti resource management plan. There's also some new and some changed freshwater values. There's a new value around threatened species. There's changes to the ecosystem health values, and there's a new mandatory value for mahinga kai, but we actually already use that in our catchment planning, so we're a little bit ahead of the game there. But all this does mean that the Waipawa catchment plan will need a refresh. We can't just stick with what we've got. And then the timeframes, as has already been touched on today, changes to the TRMP have to be notified by the end of 2024. So there's not really much time to wait. Action has to start now. There are other changes, for example, around fish passage provisions, but the existing TRMP freshwater provisions are largely consistent. So it's not an area where major change will be needed straight away. So just a little bit more on giving effect to Te Mana o Te Wai. I've just outlined there what the hierarchy of obligations is that's now enshrined in the national policy statement. So first and foremost is that the health and the well-being of water bodies and freshwater ecosystems is maintained. So that's your first priority when you're looking at management of freshwater. Second priority is the health needs of people, so things like drinking water. And then third is the ability to provide for economic growth, social activities, recreation, and so on. So that prioritization is now enshrined in the national direction and has to be given effect to in the plan. Obviously, a regional interpretation of that needs to be developed in consultation with the community and very close active involvement of Tāngata Whenua. To the right, I have an iwi perspective. So as you may well know, the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai was actually, the genesis comes from Tairafiti iwi, Ngāti Porou in particular, and they've done a lot of thinking in this space. So this is taken from a Ngāti Porou presentation about their perspective of Te Mana o Te Wai. So that the first right is about protecting the water, then it's about enabling, so what can the Wai provide in sustainable terms, and then it's about regeneration, so restoring the mauri of degraded waterways. Moving on, GDC started to think more closely about what active involvement of Tāngata Whenua could look like. So you already have a joint management arrangement for the Waipu catchment, so that's a clear example of very active involvement, co-management. There are other options as well, and these are not mutually exclusive, so it could be any or all of these options or other options that Council and iwi develop together. So we could have things like kaitiaki reference groups, which are groupings of resource management practitioners and technical advisors from iwi and hapu that come together to discuss issues and provide sort of a more technical advice to Council. Hubs, so similar to the kaitiaki reference groups, but GDC staff are actually embedded in the groups and talking with the iwi practitioners and advisors. Hapu or iwi that have close whakapapa associations and close aspirations in terms of waterways could work together as collectives to come up with their aspirations for waterways. Consultants and contractors could be engaged both by iwi and or council to provide advice. Governance level hui between councillors and iwi leaders as already occurs, and no doubt a range of other options too. And then there's just some other things that sort of need to be considered as we move through this journey, is things like how do kaitiaki share their mātauranga with council, and how is that done safely and appropriately? And what tools and assistance does iwi and hapu need to participate and tick and meet the test of active engagement and involvement? So next, and again, this has already been touched on in the meeting today, there is a new freshwater planning process that the council has to follow for changes that involve freshwater in its planning, giving effect to the MPS. So this isn't optional. So I've just tried to highlight sort of the differences between your standard plan making process and the new freshwater planning process. So there will be, previously, you could choose to use a collaborative process or your usual standard plan making process. Now you must use freshwater process. As usual, the submissions process runs. The national oversight is much stronger in terms of freshwater now. There is a Chief Freshwater Commissioner has been appointed. That's Professor Peter Skelton, an ex-Environment Court judge. The hearing panels, instead of being selected by council, will be selected by the Chief Freshwater Commissioner. And it will usually be 5 people, 2 independent freshwater commissioners selected from a pool. Council does have the option to put forward 2 nominations, or more than 2, but 2 will be selected by the Chief. And Tanata Whenua also have a chance to put forward nominations, and one of those will be appointed to the panel. The panel will have extra powers, so it will be more like an environment court if the panel chooses to exercise those powers, like cross-examination, making recommendations beyond the scope of submissions, directing people to go away and caucus. So it could potentially become a lot more formal process than some local hearings. And in terms of appeals, there are limitations on what can be appealed. Appeals to the Environment Court are only allowed if a council doesn't accept the hearing panel's recommendations. There will also be the right to appeal to the High Court on points of law. So if you think somebody thinks that a point of law question needs to be raised. So it's more similar to the Auckland Unitary Plan process. Next slide.
Councillor Worsnop just have a quick question.
Oh, sure.
My question is just if we adopt a streamlined planning process, does that take precedence over this, or do you still have to follow the freshwater planning process? Like what would be the one that?
Good question. We still have to follow the freshwater planning process. It's mandatory for changes, plan changes, or new plans that relate to freshwater for regional council component of those plans.
Thanks,
So
Jo.
it does present an interesting scenario where potentially you could end up with different bits of your TRMP going through different processes. And the integration of those is going to be a challenge. MFE are more than aware of that because several organisations, particularly unitary authorities, have raised this concern.
Jo, there are a few questions around the table. I just want to check in with you to see how far down the line you are with your presentation, because if you just have a few more slides, maybe we'll hang on to the end.
Have about 5 more. Okay. In your hands. I'm happy to take questions as we go or plough on.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Burdett and then Councillor Foster.
Joe, well presented. But I have a question. Given that the Gisborne District Council is the regulator and we are legally obliged to deal with iwi and hapu in terms of mātauranga Māori and Te Mana o Te Wai. How do you see that playing out?
We have had an initial workshop with iwi representatives just on Te Mana o Te Wai, and there is definitely a very strong appetite to work together on developing what Te Mana o Te Wai looks like for the region. I think it would be fair to say that we'll need to do a lot more work and a lot more engaging, more workshopping, and it's going to be quite an intense process that needs full commitment from both council and iwi. But the appetite is definitely there from iwi. They're really keen to be involved and work with council.
So, and supplementary to that, Joe, in terms of the pecking order, if that's what how one can describe it, are we in partnership with iwi like the JMA? Is that where we are going as a council in terms of Te Mana o Te Wai and Mātauranga Māori?
I guess that's really a question for you rather than for me. I would say that within the national direction, there is a strong push in that way, but it's not so prescriptive that it says you must do it this way or that way. It leaves the choice to regional and unitary councils in consultation with their communities and iwi and hapu as to decide what does that active involvement look like for you.
Thank you.
Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Joe. This goes back to one of your previous slides about the Waipawa catchment plan update. My question is an update on that plan going to affect the Makaurau Aquifer recharge project at all, as it is at the moment?
It shouldn't affect the project as it is at the moment. What it may change, and I really can't anticipate what the changes will be, but for instance, some of the targets and limits in the current plan may change. We had already signalled in that catchment plan that we would review it in 2025. Those of you who were involved may remember that for some of the freshwater quality values in particular, we didn't have enough data to set firm numeric standards. So there was always an intention to go back and revisit those.
Thank you, Joe. You can carry on with your presentation.
What slide are you on now?
We've got National Policy Statement, Freshwater Management 2020 MPS.
Okay, right. So just to signal here that it's not just about regulation, there's also some non-regulatory tools and requirements in the MPS too. The key one is about action plans, which is basically an approach to achieving environmental outcomes that doesn't solely rely on rules and consenting. So council will be required to develop these action plans if you know that you're not meeting some of your targets for freshwater, if degradation is occurring. So for example, the Tairawhiti could be a candidate. And also you'll need to develop an action plan setting out how you intend to maintain and improve fish passage in the region. So these are plans that probably sit outside your Tairafiti resource management plan, but are more action focused and on the ground. So in terms of those new rules and regulations, so this is the next slide. I've tried to pull out what I think some of the most significant for Tairafiti, but it'd be fair to say that everyone's still getting to grips with exactly what the rules and regulations mean. So stock exclusion, there are slightly different requirements to the current TRMP. Converting from forestry to pastoral land use is seen as intensification and might trigger a resource consent requirement. That activity is currently not captured in our plan. Winter grazing, again, different requirements to the TRMP. And then wetlands and streams, there's this new approach of no net loss, which isn't captured in the TRMP. So there will be quite some significant changes there. So there will be a big one-off job for the consenting team figuring out how the new rules fit with the current plan and what the more stringent rule is. And I know that work is already underway. There are several rules that are specific to dairy activities. That's not so relevant to Tairafiti as it's a relatively minor industry in Tairafiti. And on the upside, we are already adopting most of the updated water measurement and reporting regulation requirements. So that shouldn't be such a biggie for Tairafiti. And I've just got an example on the next slide of how some of the new rules contrast with what's currently in the TRMP, just to give a bit of a flavour for how complicated it can get. So for example, just looking at that top row, which is the stock exclusion rules, different dates, different setbacks, applying to different waterways. So that really is just a flavour of, it's not a straightforward read one rule, that's all we need to worry about. There's going to have to be a careful process of figuring out which rules apply where and when. And every council around the country will be facing the same challenge. So overall, what does the freshwater package mean for Gisborne District Council? So there is an opportunity there to integrate freshwater planning with the review of the larger review of the Tairafiti Resource Management Plan. There will need to be a significant amount of engagement with communities and tāngata whenua. We will need to look at ways to actively involve tāngata whenua. We will need additional resourcing in all likelihood to support freshwater planning. And that's not just in the planning, it's also in the science, the monitoring, the engagement, kaupapa Māori. And then as we progress through the planning and come out the other side, we'll need additional resourcing for implementation and action planning. So that's more your integrated catchments, resource consents, science, monitoring and compliance teams. Early on, when engagement was occurring on the freshwater plan, there was some work done on behalf of the regional sector on what the annual cost of the freshwater package could be for regional councils. Some quite scary numbers here. It was a report done by Castalia, and they estimated the average cost per regional council for implementation was about $13 million per year. Gisborne costs were estimated at around $7 million per year. These are very rough and ready numbers based on a series of assumptions, but it just highlight that it won't be an insignificant amount. So what's happening now? So we have been talking with other regional councils as we scope out a work program. There's also a national implementation program being developed, and that's really at the CE and director level at the moment. Lots of work being led by James Palmer from Hawke's Bay Regional Council, working in partnership with MFE, MPI and Kahui Māori to see what can be done at a national basis to prevent, everyone going off and doing the same thing 16 times in slightly different ways. There's lots of discussions happening internally about what the existing resourcing is and what additional requirements are needed, and you'll be seeing the outputs of that in your long-term planning decision making and workshops. A business case is being prepared for the review of the TRMP that includes the freshwater package. As I mentioned earlier, we have had that initial hui with iwi exploring Te Mana o Te Wai, and there's more to come on that and a joint scoping exercise. One of the key messages that did come out of that workshop was that the current allocation framework is not likely to reflect the long-term vision for iwi for Te Mana o Te Wai. So we currently run a first come first served water allocation framework, which is pretty much the same throughout the country. There were some strong messages that that's not working for iwi and doesn't reflect Te Mana o Te Wai. And that is the end of what I had on my slide. So happy to take any further questions.
Thanks for that, Joe, and thank you for outlining, especially at the end of the presentation, showing what the impacts for us are. Councillor Dowsing, and then Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. When I reflect on that presentation and the discussion we had in the last meeting around the requirement for all of our catchment plans to be updated, essentially, and now we're throwing Waipoa back in the mix as well, so it's not, we have several to do by 2024. It strikes me that we've actually got an example of best practice in the Wastewater Management Committee and the the process that led us to creating that was to give iwi equitable influence over the decision-making process. And it'd be interesting for staff to investigate whether that would be a suitable method to apply to this as well, a subcommittee with iwi representation.
Thank you for that, Councillor Dowsing. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Joe, for the presentation, really helpful for everybody. Can you tell me if you've had any hui with pastoral farmers? Because alongside iwi, pastoral farmers are probably going to be one of the most significantly impacted by the new water regs, and it's as much to give them information.
I don't believe anything has been planned as yet, but I haven't been so much involved in what's happening in terms of implementing the rules and regulations. I've been more looking at the national policy statement and what needs to be done to incorporate that into the TRMP.
That's what I meant as well, to give them the opportunity to get in from the beginning so that they understand. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions off the floor? Councillor Akua-Hapan.
It's more kind of reflection similar to that of Councillor Dowsing, really. When I listened to a large portion of that framework, Kōrero, Joe, thank you. There's this real kind of strongest kind of push for Te Tiriti, for us to really be honouring and understanding that framework, which I'm hearing more of, which is obviously very heartening because since being here, we're on this kind of journey which is underpinned by Te Tiriti. So I guess for me, I'm just looking forward to what that will look like and what it means. But have we got the resources enough of for all working in these spaces? Respect to Te Tiriti, because I always feel like we talk of it, it's this document that underpins multitudes of things for iwi, but have we got enough resourcing for staff, even if not for all of us in this space? Is that something that we need to push back to central governments when they change and push these kind of formal process to us? Because it's happening a lot more. Councils are being given or expected to do a whole lot more, and is that resource coming with it? So that's really my question. Is it's wonderful to see and to hear, but what does it look like when we're talking action? When for many of us, when was the last time we had a treaty workshop per se? So I'm just aware that that's the kind of space we're in right now as our local councils, if not the councils throughout New Zealand. Kia ora.
Thank you. To that, through your worship. So we currently don't have enough resources because this is all new, and it requires particular expertise, not only in planning but also around fundamental engagement. And so part of what you will hear, this is an excellent segue into activity management plans and a view from where activity managers are in their development of what they see we need to be doing in the next 3 to 10 years. And part of that is around how is Māori engagement or that capability being built or considered and streaming through some of these areas, so that as we go forward in our long-term plan, that we are resourcing in the right places that we need to. But currently we don't have enough resources to deliver on the ambitious program that central government is putting on to all local authorities. And we're certainly having that discussion around the regional CE table. And I think Your Worship mentioned the other time, last time the regional sector group met, and have charged the chief executives to look at different models, potential shared services, so that we can start bringing the compliance costs or costs to comply to legislation down.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you for that. I just guess now is a good time for us to say to those imposing on us, actually, we need you to consider how to resource us better so we can do this well. Because for non-Māori, of course, there's, hearing lots more of this dialogue. We're wanting to, as especially in our region, we are really cognizant of that relationship, our dual cultural type content, all the things that we are doing, it all is all talking, that the puzzle is coming together. So I think it's important we push back and say, we need this. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you for that. Councillor Burdett.
Madam Chair, this is a huge challenge for Council. And in terms of the resources that CE said we haven't got, do we have the opportunity to gear up? Because that delivery is 3 or 4 years' work, putting it all together.
Councillor Badette, that's our opportunity. You can see all the activity managers that's just walked in with their bags of money at the back. We're going to have a discussion about prioritisation, and that's the discussion we will be having very soon.
I just wanted to make the point that while our costs are going to be eye-watering, and frankly at the moment seem pretty insurmountable, that's only part of the cost. The majority of the cost will actually be borne by our community beyond rates. So it's going to be critical for us to work with our community really, really closely, because while we're looking at an unaffordable bill, there will be a lot of other people looking at unaffordable bills too, and wondering how they reconcile that. A lot of, this is a massive challenge, and I think probably just to Pat's point around consultation with, she mentioned farmers, but I would say the wider community, because the freshwater reforms apply to not just landowners, but also users of, water in just about any capacity. We need to, as quick as we can, identify what changes are going to be applied in a local context so that people have certainty. Water systems can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars on farms, and if they are implemented without a full understanding of what the rules actually are, it's really, really important for us to be timely and clear in our communications with our community.
Thank you for that. Do I have a mover for this paper? Councillor Badette, Councillor Robinson is a seconder. If there are no more discussion, thank you, Joe, for that. I put it to the table. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and at 1:45 we will start with a 2-hour workshop. It is